The Rod Laver Arena should have been celebrating one of the greatest tennis performances of the year. Instead, it became the epicenter of one of the most shocking controversies to ever rock the Australian Open. Aryna Sabalenka advanced to the final, yes, but her path there has left an indelible stain on what should have been a triumphant moment. What happened during that semi-final match against Ukraine's Aryna Svitolina wasn't just another on-court dispute or heated exchange between competitors. This was something far more sinister, something that has sent shockwaves through the entire tennis community and raised serious questions about sportsmanship, respect, and accountability in professional tennis. The Bulgarian powerhouse has always played with fire and intensity. Her trademark grunts echo through stadiums worldwide. Her powerful ground strokes leave opponents scrambling, and her competitive spirit burns with an almost frightening intensity. But intensity crossed into inexcusable territory when Sabalenka allegedly made a racial comment directed at Svitolina during one of the most high-stakes moments of the tournament. The allegation alone is explosive enough to dominate headlines for weeks. But what makes the story even more disturbing is the pattern of behavior that preceded it. This wasn't an isolated incident from a player having one bad day. This was the culmination of years of controversial conduct, questionable sportsmanship, and a seemingly growing disregard for the fundamental principles that make tennis the gentleman's game it has historically been. Let's rewind to that fateful semifinal. The atmosphere was electric. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and both players knew that victory meant a shot at Grand Slam glory. Sabalenka, the powerful Belarusian known for her aggressive baseline game and those thunderous grunts that have become her signature, was locked in battle with Svitolina, the resilient Ukrainian who has captured hearts worldwide, not just for her tennis prowess, but for her unwavering strength during her country's ongoing struggles. The contrast between these two players couldn't have been more stark, and perhaps that tension contributed to what would unfold. During a particularly intense rally, with the crowd roaring and every point feeling like it could shift the momentum of the entire match, something happened that made the entire stadium go silent. Witnesses claimed that Sabalenka, visibly frustrated and perhaps feeling the pressure of the moment, directed a racial comment towards Svitolina. The exact words have been the subject of intense speculation and debate, but what isn't in question is the immediate reaction. The chair umpire, who had been monitoring the match with professional precision, didn't hesitate. In a move that some are calling brave and others are calling overdue, the official immediately intervened, calling a hindrance penalty that caused Sabalenka a crucial point. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of gasps, murmurs, and confused whispers. Television commentators struggled to find words. Social media exploded within seconds. What just happened? Did we really hear what we think we heard? The answer, according to multiple sources close to the match, was a resounding and disturbing yes. Sabalenka had crossed a line that no professional athlete should ever approach, let alone leap over with both feet. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Rather than showing remorse, rather than immediately apologizing or showing any awareness of the gravity of what had just occurred, Sabalenka did what she has become increasingly known for. She fought back. She challenged the call. She demanded a review with the same aggressive energy she brings to her forehand winners. She contested the umpire's decision, seemingly unable or unwilling to comprehend that some things in tennis and in life are simply non-negotiable. The review process felt like it took an eternity, with every second amplifying the tension and discomfort spreading through the arena. When the decision was upheld, when the penalty stood firm, it sent a clear message that even at the highest levels of professional tennis, there are boundaries that cannot be crossed. To truly understand the significance of this moment, we need to examine Sabalenka's troubling history of on-court behavior. This wasn't her first rodeo when it comes to controversy, and that's precisely what makes this incident so much more damning. The pattern is undeniable, and it's a pattern that the tennis establishment has, until now, largely allowed to continue unchecked. Take her matches against Coco Gauff, the young American sensation who has captured the world's imagination with her talent, poise, and maturity beyond her years. When Sabalenka faced Gauff, she employed what many observers characterized as psychological warfare. The grunts reached D-cell levels that seemed designed less for her own rhythm and more to disrupt her opponent's concentration. The screams, the celebrations, the overall energy she brought to the court all seemed calibrated to intimidate rather than simply compete. Against a teenager still finding her footing at the highest levels of the sport, this approach struck many as not just aggressive, but predatory. Sabalenka managed to secure victory in that encounter, but the taste it left in many people's mouths was decidedly bitter. Then there was the final against Elena Rybakina, another chapter in Sabalenka's growing collection of controversial moments. While she ultimately lost that match, her behavior afterward was telling. Rather than graciously accepting defeat and congratulating her opponent, Sabalenka made comments that cast dispersions on Rybakina's victory, essentially suggesting that she hadn't truly earned the win. The implication was clear and insulting. Sabalenka only lost because Sabalenka beat herself, not because her opponent was better. It's the kind of excusum and opponent diminishing that reveals a fundamental lack of respect for the competitive process and for the achievements of fellow professionals who have worked just as hard to reach the pinnacle of the placed sport. This pattern continued at the US Open, where Sabalenka faced Gauff again, this time in the final. After losing, Sabalenka's comments were startlingly similar to her post-Rybakina remarks. She essentially argued that Gauff hadn't won because she played incredible tennis, but rather because Sabalenka had made unforced errors from easy positions. The quote is worth examining in detail, because it reveals so much about Sabalenka's mindset. She suggested that from the outside, it looked like she was making mistakes on easy balls, implying that under normal circumstances, with her usual level of play, the outcome would have been different. The subtext was unmistakable. Gauff's championship wasn't truly earned. It was merely the beneficiary of Sabalenka's off day. This inability to give credit where credit is due, this compulsion to explain away losses as personal failures rather than opponents' triumphs, speaks to a deeper issue with sportsmanship and respect. Tennis, at its core, is an individual sport that demands not just physical excellence, but emotional maturity and mutual respect among competitors. The tradition of shaking hands at the net after every match, regardless of the outcome, symbolizes this fundamental principle. You fought hard, your opponent fought hard, and regardless of who won, you acknowledge each other's effort and humanity. Sabalenka's pattern of behavior suggests a player who views opponents not as worthy adversaries, but as obstacles to be overcome, diminished, or in the worst-case scenario, as we allegedly saw in the Australian Open semifinal, denigrated with racial language. The incident with Svitolina represents an escalation that even Sabalenka's most ardent defenders will struggle to justify or explain away. A racial slur isn't a heat-of-the-moment competitive outburst. It's not a frustrated grunt or an overly enthusiastic celebration. It's a deliberate dehumanization, a verbal attack that strikes at someone's identity and dignity in the most fundamental way. In a sport that has worked for decades to become more inclusive, more diverse, and more welcoming to players and fans from all backgrounds, such language represents a massive step backward and a betrayal of everything the tennis community claims to stand for. The umpire's swift action deserves recognition and analysis. In professional tennis, chair umpires often face impossible positions, making split-second decisions that will be scrutinized by millions and second-guessed by commentators with the luxury of slow-motion replays and unlimited time to deliberate. In this case, the umpire's response was both immediate and appropriate. By calling the hindrance penalty without hesitation, the official sent several crucial messages simultaneously. First, that racial language has no place on a tennis court, regardless of the stakes of the match or the stature of the player involved. Second, that umpires are willing to enforce standards of conduct even when doing so might prove controversial or unpopular. And third, that the rules of tennis extend beyond balarks and footfalls to encompass basic human decency and respect. The penalty itself, a point deduction, might seem modest given the severity of the offense. Some critics have already argued that Sabalenka should have faced more severe consequences, potentially including disqualification from the match or a suspension from future tournaments. These arguments have merit, and they raise important questions about how tennis governing bodies handle conduct violations that go beyond the typical scope of end-court penalties. A point penalty sends a message, certainly, but does it send a strong enough message Does it create sufficient deterrent for future behavior, whether from Sabalenka herself or from other players who might be watching and learning what they can get away with? What makes this incident even more emotionally charged is the specific target of Sabalenka's alleged comment. Aryna Svitolina isn't just another tennis player. She's a Ukrainian athlete who has continued to compete at the highest levels while her country faces invasion and her people endure unimaginable hardship. Svitolina has used her platform repeatedly to raise awareness about Ukraine's situation, to fundra for humanitarian causes, and to represent her nation with dignity and pride on the world stage. She's become a symbol of resilience, strength, and grace under pressure. For Sabalenka, whose home country of Belarus has been closely allied with Russia during the conflict, to allegedly direct racial language at Svitolina adds layers of geopolitical tension and personal anguish to what was already a highly charged situation. Svitolina's response to the incident speaks volumes about her character and the depth of hurt caused by Sabalenka's words. Throughout the remainder of the match, she maintained her composure with extraordinary discipline. She didn't allow the comment to derail her performance, didn't engage in retaliatory behavior, and didn't give Sabalenka the satisfaction of seeing her rattled or upset. This takes immense mental strength, the kind of emotional control that separates good players from great ones and true champions from talented competitors. But when the match concluded, Svitolina made a statement that resonated far beyond the confines of Rod Laver Arena. She refused to shake Sabalenka's hand. In most contexts, refusing the traditional post-match handshake would itself be considered poor sportsmanship. Tennis etiquette demands that players acknowledge each other at the net, offering a hand regardless of the match's outcome or any conflicts that occurred during play. But context matters enormously, and in this case, Svitolina's refusal wasn't petulance or poor sportsmanship. It was a powerful, dignified protest. It was a statement that some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed with a perfunctory handshake. It was a declaration that respect cannot be demanded or expected when it has been so thoroughly violated. By refusing to shake hands, Svitolina demonstrated that she would not participate in the pretense that everything was normal, that the match had been conducted within acceptable boundaries, or that Sabalenka's behavior deserved any acknowledgement beyond the contempt it earned. The tennis world's reaction has been swift and divided, though notably, the division isn't really about whether Sabalenka's alleged comment was acceptable. Everyone agrees it wasn't. The division centers on what should happen next and how severely Sabalenka should be punished beyond the in-match penalty she received. Some voices, particularly those concerned with precedent and due process, have called for thorough investigation before rushing to judgment. They argue that while the allegations are serious, fairness demands that all facts be gathered, all perspectives be heard, and all evidence be evaluated before careering sanctions are imposed. These voices emphasize that reputation matters, that accusations can sometimes be misunderstood or exaggerated, and that the court of public opinion shouldn't replace proper adjudication procedures. On the other side are those who believe the evidence is already clear, the pattern of behavior is already established, and the time for lenience has long passed. These critics point out that Sabalenka has been given chance after chance to modify her behavior, to show growth and maturity, to demonstrate that she understands the responsibilities that come with being a professional athlete on the world stage. Each time she's reverted to the same troubling patterns, diminishing opponents, making excuses, crossing boundaries, and showing insufficient remorse. From this perspective, the Australian Open incident isn't an aberration requiring careful investigation. It's the inevitable result of allowing problematic behavior to go unchecked for too long. And the appropriate response is swift, significant consequences that finally make clear that such conduct will not be tolerated. Social media has amplified both perspectives, as it inevitably does. But the overwhelming sentiment seems to lean toward condemnation of Sabalenka and support for both Svitolina and the umpire who penalized the Belarusian. Hashtags demanding accountability have trended worldwide. Former players have weighed in with thoughtful commentary about the importance of sportsmanship and the damage that behavior like Sabalenka's does to tennis's reputation and culture. Fans have shared stories of similar experiences with discrimination, drawing connections between what happened on a tennis court in Melbourne and the broader struggles against racism that persist in society. The incident has become bigger than tennis, bigger than one match, bigger than two players. It's become a flashpoint for conversations about respect, accountability, privilege, and whether the sports world truly lives up to its stated values when those values are tested. What happens next will likely depend on several factors, including the findings of any official investigation, the public pressure brought to bear on tennis governing bodies, and perhaps most importantly, Sabalenka's own response in the coming days and weeks. Will she issue a genuine, heartfelt apology that acknowledges the harm caused and commits to meaningful change? Will she retreat into defensiveness, offering half-hearted explanations or qualified apologies that ring hollow? Will she remain silent, letting her lawyers and representatives speak for her while she focuses on the upcoming final? Each of these paths leads to vastly different outcomes, both for her immediate future and her long-term legacy. The tragedy in all of this is that Sabalenka is genuinely one of the most talented players in women's tennis. Her power, her court coverage, her ability to hit winners from seemingly impossible positions, these are gifts that come along once in a generation. She should be celebrated for her athletic achievements, remembered as a champion who dominated her era through skill and determination. Instead, she's at risk of being remembered primarily for controversy, for ugly incidents that overshadowed her accomplishments, for being the player who couldn't control her emotions or her words even when everything was on the line. That's a tragic waste of talent, but it's also entirely self-inflicted. Nobody forced her to make the alleged comment. Nobody required her to diminish her opponents or make excuses for losses. Nobody demanded that she prioritize intimidation over inspiration. These were choices, and choices have consequences. For the broader tennis community, this incident presents both a crisis and an opportunity. The crisis is obvious. A racial slur at one of the sport's most prestigious tournaments, captured on camera, witnessed by thousands in person and millions watching worldwide. That's a public relations nightmare and a genuine threat to tennis's carefully cultivated image as a sophisticated, inclusive, global sport. But the opportunity lies in how the tennis world responds. This could be the moment when governing bodies make clear that talent and ranking don't insulate players from consequences for unacceptable behavior. This could be when the sport demonstrates that it takes diversity, inclusion, and respect seriously, not just in marketing materials, but in enforcing standards of conduct. This could be the catalyst for broader conversations about sportsmanship, mental health support for players dealing with pressure, responsibilities that come with being a role model for millions of fans, especially young ones, forming their understanding of competition and character. The Australian Open final will proceed, and Sabalenka will compete for the championship. That much is certain based on current information. What's uncertain is how the crowd will receive her, how her opponent will approach the match, knowing what transpired in the semifinal, and how Sabalenka herself will handle the pressure of competing under a cloud of controversy. Will she be booed? Will she face hostile crowds that make their disapproval known with every point? Or will tennis's traditionally polite audiences separate their feelings about her conduct from their appreciation of the athletic competition? These questions will be answered when she steps onto the court. But the answers will reveal as much about tennis culture as they do about Sabalenka herself. Looking ahead, regardless of whether she wins or loses the final, Sabalenka faces a defining moment in her career. She's young enough to potentially have a decade or more of elite competition ahead of her. She's talented enough to win multiple Grand Slam titles and cement her place among the greats of her generation. But none of that will matter if she can't address the fundamental issues with sportsmanship and respect that have now culminated in allegations of racial language. The path to redemption, if she chooses to take it, requires more than a statement written by public relations professionals. It requires genuine reflection, sincere apology, meaningful conversations with those she's hurt, and most importantly, sustained behavioral change demonstrated over time through actions rather than words. The comparison to other athletes who have faced similar controversies is instructive. Some have successfully rehabilitated their images, reputations through humility, accountability, and commitment to growth. Others have doubled down on defiance, maintained their innocence despite overwhelming evidence, and eventually faded from relevance as sponsors abandoned them, and fans moved on to athletes who better represented the values they wanted to support. Sabalenka will have to choose which path she takes, and that choice will determine whether she's remembered as a cautionary tale or as someone who made terrible mistakes, but found the courage to acknowledge them, learn from them, and become better. For Svitolina, this incident adds another chapter to what has already been a story of remarkable courage and resilience. She came into this tournament carrying the weight of representing a nation at war, dealing with the emotional toll of knowing that family and friends face danger while she competes thousands of miles away, and managing the pressure of performing at the highest level while so much else demands her attention and energy. To then face alleged racial abuse during what should have been the crowning achievement of reaching an Australian Open final demonstrates just how much adversity she's been forced to navigate. Her composure throughout the match and her dignified refusal to shake hands afterward will likely be remembered as defining moments. Images that captured both the ugliness of discrimination and the strength required to face it with grace. The tennis community owes Svitolina more than sympathy. It owes her action, accountability, and assurance that the sport she's given so much to will protect her and all players from the kind of abuse she allegedly experienced. Words of support are nice, but they're insufficient without concrete steps to prevent future incidents and to appropriately punish those who cross lines that should never be approached. The coming weeks will reveal whether tennis's governing bodies understand this responsibility and are willing to act on it. As this story continues to develop, as investigations proceed and decisions are made about potential additional sanctions, the entire sports world will be watching. Tennis has long prided itself on being different from other sports, more refined, more respectful, more cognizant of tradition and etiquette. This incident challenges that self-perception and demands that tennis either live up to its stated ideals or acknowledge that it has the same problems with conduct and accountability that plague other sports. The choice belongs to the administrators, officials, and ultimately the players themselves, who collectively shape the culture of their sport through the standards they uphold and the behaviors they tolerate or reject.